In the forgotten corners of the galaxy, where silence is louder than any scream, a man stumbled across something no one else dared to see. She was covered in mud, branded by scars, left to die in a place where hope had long since turned to dust. They called her contaminated, untouchable. But he looked closer, and saw something else. Not a danger. Not a threat. A story that someone had tried to erase. This is not about heroes, this is not about war, it's about the quiet things, the choices we make when no one's watching, and the moments that remind us we are still human. So don't look away, because once you enter this world, you might not leave the same. Chapter 1, The Forgotten Zone. Sector 8 wasn't a place, it was a graveyard that forgot to die, a stretch of land so consumed by ash and sorrow, even light seemed to bend around it, like it didn't want to remember where it had been. There were no signs, no markers, no welcoming gates, only the silence of a forgotten corner of the galaxy, wrapped in barbed wire, broken steel, and the smell of melted plastic that never quite faded. The sky above Sector 8 wasn't a sky, it was a stain, gray, sick, static. There were no stars here, no moon to reflect on cracked window panes, just a smog-choked blur of forgotten satellites and broken drone lights flickering like dying insects. The wind didn't blow, it whined, like a machine on its last breath, and underneath that noise, something deeper pulsed, like the zone itself was still alive, still breathing, still remembering the screams that once filled it. I wasn't supposed to be here long, just a delivery, water filters for the refugee posts along the outer rim, nothing heroic, nothing dangerous, just another checkpoint, another signature, another engine hum in the silence. But the moment my wheels hit the cracked ferrocrete roads of Sector 8, something in the air changed, the kind of change you don't see but feel, in the hairs on the back of your neck, in the tightening of your throat, in the way your fingers suddenly grip the steering wheel like it might float away. The ruins of old shelters leaned into each other like forgotten bones, their frames creaked in protest at nothing, or maybe everything. Tarps, long sun-bleached and wind-shredded, flapped like ghost skins in the breeze. Empty barrels, stained with soot and old fire, stood like hollow sentinels among crumbling stones and piles of twisted metal. There were people there, I think, shadows, shapes, refugees wrapped in layers of cloth and silence, their faces hidden behind scarves and soot, eyes too tired to blink. They moved like sleepwalkers. No one waved, no one nodded, no one asked who I was or why I had come. They didn't care, or maybe they knew better. I drove slow, real slow. Every bump felt like a warning, every puddle of oily water a trap. Even the echoes sounded different here, muffled, like the air didn't want to carry sound. The road split near what used to be a plaza. A statue lay shattered there. I think it was a dove once, now just wings and stone dust. And then, I saw her. At first, I thought it was debris, a collapsed tent maybe, or the rusted remains of a service bot left to rot, but something about the shape, it didn't belong, curled, delicate, still. I slowed to a crawl. My windshield was coated in dust and grime, but even through it, I could feel her presence, like static on a COMM channel. My stomach turned. I don't know why. I'd seen bodies before, too many, but this didn't feel like death, it felt like waiting. I cut the engine. The sudden silence rang in my ears. I stepped out, boots crunching on gravel and bones, literal bones, small ones, animal maybe, I didn't want to know. The wind hit me like breath from a dying engine, warm, sour, electric. She lay near one of the fire pits, half in shadow, half buried in mud that looked more like oil than soil. Her limbs were folded, unnatural but fragile, like a marionette dropped mid-performance. Her skin, where it wasn't hidden under layers of grime, shimmered faintly, green, but not the green of rot or algae. No, this was something else, softer, almost like moss in moonlight. Her face was angular, too perfect. Her ears, longer than a human, sloped back gently like some ancient design meant for wind or song. Her hair clung to her like black rope, slicked against her shoulders, her throat, her cheek. I knelt slowly. Every movement felt like a violation, like if I breathed too hard, she'd disappear, back into the earth, back into the memory of a place that devoured the forgotten. Her chest rose, faint, barely, still alive, still holding on. But no one else moved. The other shapes nearby, they glanced, then turned away, as if she wasn't there, as if they'd all agreed not to see her, and maybe th. Chapter 2, A Stranger in the Mud. She didn't move, not even a little. It was the kind of stillness that didn't feel natural, not like sleep, not like rest. It was too perfect, too quiet, like the world had stopped for her, and she was just waiting to be forgotten. Her skin looked like stone, smooth, green, not sickly green, not the kind that reminded you of decay, but something softer, like marble kissed by moss. It shimmered faintly in the dull light, almost glowing, almost hiding. She could have been a statue, if statues could breathe. But she was breathing, slow, barely there, and somehow, that made it worse. It meant she was alive, it meant someone should have helped her, but no one did. They stood back, the shapes in the haze, those worn-out souls hiding beneath blankets and scrap. They looked at her, and then looked away, quick, nervous, pretending she wasn't real. I heard them whisper, not words I could fully understand, not in my language, but the tone was clear enough. Unclean, contaminated, dangerous, the kind of words that make people forget compassion, the kind of fear that dresses itself as caution, that convinces people they are safe so long as they do nothing. I watched them. I watched how their hands stayed inside their coats, how their eyes never returned to her, how they moved further into the shadows, as if her stillness might reach out and stain them. I took a step forward. No one stopped me, but no one came with me either. The mud around her was thick. It clung to her like it wanted to keep her, like the earth itself had decided she didn't belong anywhere else. I crouched down. Her face was angled toward the sky, eyes half open but not seeing, her mouth slightly parted, no sound coming from it. She looked lost, like her spirit had left hours ago but her body didn't know how to follow. There were bruises on her neck, small ones, old, and scars, pale and jagged, barely visible beneath the grime, but deep enough to have stories carved into them, burned scars, maybe, or something worse. Her clothing, if you could call it that, was more patchwork than fabric, pieces of cloth wrapped tight across her chest and legs, tangled in places, torn in others, not made for warmth, not made for protection, just made to cover. Her hair was soaked, black as space, tangled into thick strands that stuck to her cheeks and neck like wet rope. In places, it shimmered blue under the filtered light, like oil on water. I reached out slowly. I didn't want to scare her, didn't want to touch without warning, but she hadn't moved once, not when I knelt, not when I whispered. Her eyes flickered, just once, barely. Still alive. Still there. I removed my jacket. It was nothing special, old, faded, torn in one sleeve, but it was dry, and warm, and human. I laid it gently across her shoulders. Her body didn't react, but her breath hitched, just for a second, a tremble in her jaw, a tiny twitch in her fingers. That was enough. That meant she still felt. Her skin was ice cold beneath the dirt, not like someone who had been outside for minutes, like someone who had been there for days. Her body was light, too light. She weighed almost nothing, like hunger had turned her hollow. I slipped my arms beneath her carefully. She didn't resist. She didn't scream. She didn't even blink. She just folded against me, limp, broken, as if she had forgotten how to fight, as if part of her didn't believe I was real. Her head rested against my chest as I carried her back to the truck, her hair soaked through my shirt. I felt the cold bleed into me. Still, no one moved, no one tried to help. They watched me pass like I was carrying a bomb. I heard someone whisper, "Don't touch her." I ignored it. I walked, past the rusted gates, past the watchtower that hadn't worked in years, past the eyes that had seen too much and now chose to see nothing. When I reached the truck, I opened the door with one hand and laid her gently in the passenger seat, her knees folded like paper, her arms slid from the jacket, revealing more scars, thin lines, faint burns, a life drawn in pain. I pulled the jack. Chapter 3, The Outpost. My place wasn't much, just a half-broken maintenance shed tucked between a crumbling ridge and a dead relay tower, one of those places you forget exists until the wind points you there again. The solar panels outside complained every morning, they creaked, groaned, shook like old bones, just barely pulling in enough charge to keep the heater alive. But inside, it was quiet, and in Sector 8, that meant something. I pushed the door open with my shoulder, the metal scraping against the ground like it hadn't been moved in years. Dust scattered in the sunlight. The air smelled of machine oil and warmth, a strange mix, but better than what we left behind. She was still in my arms, still cold, still silent. I carried her across the room and laid her down on the cot, a thin frame of aluminum with a single stained blanket folded at the foot. She didn't flinch when the metal creaked under her weight, didn't blink. Her breathing was slow, steady, too calm for someone that broken. I stepped back, just for a second, and looked at her. Beneath the layers of mud and dirt, her skin was like green stone, smooth but strange. Her limbs hung loosely, her hands, curled slightly inward, trembled in a rhythm that didn't match the room. Her body was covered in marks, scars. Some thin, like slashes from wires or claws, others deeper, wider, like someone had pressed fire into her flesh and held it there. They weren't random. They were patterns, like someone had tried to erase her history one line at a time. I didn't know what they meant, but I knew what they felt like: pain, silencing. Someone had tried to carve her into something else. I stood still for a long moment, then I turned away. Beside the corner was a rigged-together decontamination unit, old ship tech, modified with spare tubing and a water tank I'd salvaged last winter. It wasn't fancy, but it worked. I flipped the power. The heater kicked in with a low hum, the pipes rattled, and then, after a pause, warm water began to flow. Steam curled up slowly, reaching for the ceiling like soft fingers in the air. I walked back to her. Still no movement, no sound, only her eyes, half-lidded, half-aware, tracking the shadows on the wall. "I don't know if you understand me," I said, kneeling beside her, voice low. "But the water's warm. It's clean. It might help." She didn't respond, didn't nod, but her eyes, they shifted, just a little, toward the sound of the water. It was something. I reached for her hand, slowly, deliberately, and lifted her gently from the cot. Her weight pressed against me, feather-light, bones under skin. Her legs moved awkwardly, stiff and fragile, like she hadn't walked in a long time, or had forgotten how. I led her to the shower stall, opened the curtain halfway, then I turned away. I gave her privacy, because even now, after everything, she deserved that much. The sound of water filled the room, soft and steady, like distant rain. Then I heard it. A gasp, sharp, raw, and then, a sob. It hit hard. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just real. The kind of sound that didn't come from pain, but from memory, from the return of something that had been missing too long. I didn't speak, didn't move. I sat outside the curtain, cross-legged on the floor, and waited. She stayed in the water a long time. The sobs stopped eventually, but the water kept running. I imagined it washing away more than dirt, maybe grief, maybe silence, maybe ghosts. When she stepped out, wrapped in a towel, her skin glowed faintly under the low light, no longer hidden by mud or shadow. It was luminous, deep green, almost translucent in places, like light lived beneath the surface. She walked slowly, barefoot, back to the cot. Her eyes didn't meet mine. Her lips parted like she might say something, but no words came. She sat down, curled up, wrapped the towel tighter around her frame. I grabbed a blanket and laid it gently over her shoulders. She didn't react. But she didn't pull away. I turned down the lights. The hum of the heater filled the space again. For the first time since she entered my outpost, she looked. Chapter 4, First Tears. At first, there was only the sound of water, soft, continuous, like rain falling in a world that had forgotten how to cry. I stayed on the other side of the curtain, not speaking, not moving, just listening. Every now and then, the pipes let out a tired hiss, like even the machine couldn't believe someone was using it again. The room filled with steam, thick and warm, curling across the floor, up the metal walls, wrapping around us like breath made visible, the kind of warmth that didn't just touch the skin but reached deeper, into the bones, into the places we hide from the cold. She stood there, I knew, under that stream of water, still silent, still healing. And then, it happened. A sound. Not from the heater. Not from the water. From her. A gasp, so sudden, so sharp, it cracked the air in half. Then came the sob. One. Then another. Quiet, but raw. Not the kind of sob you hear after a wound. This was older. Deeper. Something long buried finally rising back to the surface. I didn't look. I didn't call out. I just sat still. Because I knew, in that moment, she wasn't crying because she was weak. She was crying because her body finally remembered how. Tears and water blended, pouring down skin that had been cold too long. Her knees hit the metal floor of the stall with a soft thud, but still, the water kept falling. So did she. Not in fear. In release. I stayed on the floor, my back against the wall, knees pulled in, hands resting still. The heat pressed against my face like a hand, soft but constant. I felt it in my chest, not pain exactly, but ache, familiar, heavy. I closed my eyes, and I waited. Time passed differently in silence. Minutes stretched, maybe hours, I lost track. Eventually, the sobs faded, not all at once, they left her slowly, like visitors unsure if they were allowed to go. The water, too, changed. It had started brown, mud, and oil washing from her skin, but now, it ran clear, pure, almost glowing in the low light of the shack. She had stayed in the warmth long enough to return to herself. Finally, I heard the curtain shift. She stepped out, barefoot, wrapped in nothing but a towel and steam. Her hair was wet, clinging to her back in dark waves. Her skin, once hidden, now shimmered gently, not like metal, not like paint, but like something alive beneath the surface, a deep, soft green, smooth as polished stone and marked with pale lines, scars, old and quiet, whispering of things no one had the right to ask. Her eyes were red, but not broken. Just open. Like for the first time, she could see the room around her and know it wouldn't hurt her. She walked past me without a word, each step soft, each movement slow. She returned to the cot, curled onto it like she remembered it was safe, wrapped the towel tighter around herself like it was her last shield. I stood, brought her the blanket again. She didn't look at me, but she let me place it gently across her shoulders. She didn't speak. But she didn't flinch. That meant something. That meant trust, even if it had no name yet. I lowered the lights, let the room fall into shadows and orange glows. The heater clicked gently, offering its breath into the silence. I moved to the far corner and sat at my workbench, picked up a piece of broken metal just to have something in my hands. But my eyes, they kept finding her. She wasn't watching me. She was staring at the water on the floor, as if it had done something magical, as if part of her still didn't believe it had touched her. The water hadn't just washed away dirt. It had done something bigger. It had reminded her she was still real, still alive, still hers. We said nothing that night. No words. But the silence was warm. And when I closed my eyes to sleep, I did so knowing she had cried. And in those tears, she had come back. Chapter 5, no words, just signs. She didn't speak, not that night, not the next morning, not a single word passed her lips. But silence isn't always empty. Sometimes it says more than sound ever could. I watched her from the edge of the room, careful not to crowd, not to hover, just to notice. She moved quietly, like someone afraid to take up space, her footsteps barely touching the floor, her eyes scanning everything, not with fear, but with calculation, like she was solving a puzzle no one else could see. She never turned her back to the door. That was the first thing I noticed. No matter where she sat, the cot, the heater, even near the table, she always stayed within reach of the exit, her body facing it, her shoulders never slouched, as if she was still expecting to run, or worse, as if she was waiting for someone to come in and drag her back. I didn't ask, not yet. I just made sure the door stayed locked from the inside, and I left the heater running. She liked that. I don't know how I knew, but I did, the way she shifted slightly closer to it whenever it clicked on, the way her hands would relax near the warmth, her fingers stopping their trembling when the air grew soft. She didn't thank me, but she didn't need to. One morning, I found her near the water unit, just standing there, not using it, just listening. The pipes made a soft hum, a rhythm, a low, steady pulse that filled the room like breath. She tilted her head, eyes half closed, like the sound reminded her of something, somewhere far away. I stepped in slowly. She didn't look at me, but she didn't move either. That was progress. I said, "You like the sound?" No answer, not with her mouth, but her hand reached out, just a little, and touched the edge of the unit. A light tap. A pause. Then again. Just once. It wasn't random. It was memory. Or maybe comfort. I let the water run for her after that, even when she didn't need it, even when we weren't using it, just a low stream, quiet and constant, like a heartbeat for the room. She noticed. She always noticed. That same day, I was repairing a busted filtration core, a mess of wires, broken clamps, and scorched casings. I'd taken it apart 5 times already, and nothing made sense. She came closer, not right beside me, just near enough to see. She didn't say anything, but her eyes narrowed, her gaze moving between the pieces on the table. Then, she lifted a hand, not to touch, not to fix, but to mime a motion, fingers twisting slightly, as if screwing something into place. I blinked, waited, then followed the gesture. And it worked. The part slid into position, a perfect fit. She had remembered. Not guessed. Remembered. I looked at her. She didn't smile. Didn't glow with pride. But her face softened, just a little. I wanted to ask, "Who taught you that?" But I didn't, not yet, because that look in her eyes, it wasn't ready. Instead, I handed her the next piece. Just a small one. A broken bracket. Harmless. She hesitated, her fingers hovering above mine. Then slowly, she took it. She turned it in her palm, inspecting the angles, the crack in the side, the way the metal had warped. She wasn't looking at it like a stranger. She was looking at it like an old friend. Her hands moved with quiet confidence, like they'd done this 1,000 times before. I stayed still, watched her work. I didn't offer help. Didn't rush her. I just let her move at her own pace. And in that silence, we started to speak, not with words, but with signs. When I needed a tool, she handed it to me before I asked. When something sparked too loud, she flinched, just once, and I knew to dim the lights, to soften the sounds. She never told me what had happened. But I didn't need the details to understand the damage. The way she touched things so gently, like they might break if she wasn't careful, told me more than any confession could. The way she froze at sudden noises, or how her fingers curled into her palm when I walked too close. It wasn't about fear. It was about memory. Memory stored in skin, in breath, in movement. That night, I left the cot untouched. She. Chapter 6, Her Name. The storm came without warning, no thunder, no lightning, just a heavy silence pressing against the roof of the outpost, thick like wet fabric, curling in through the vents, clinging to the walls. Outside, the sky had turned the color of old bruises. Inside, everything felt still. I was at the workbench again, pretending to fix an old relay switch. My hands moved, but my mind wasn't in the room. It kept drifting to her. She was near the door, wrapped in her blanket, sitting like she always did, knees to her chest, back to the heater, eyes tracking the corners of the room like they were breathing. It had been 3 days since she arrived, 3 days without a single word. But every day, she had moved a little closer, closer to the water unit, closer to the tools, closer to me. Not enough to touch, not enough to break the boundary, but enough to know she was listening, and enough to know she was choosing to stay. I glanced over once, thinking she might be asleep. She wasn't. Her eyes were open, silver under the low light, reflecting the orange glow of the heater. They weren't empty, not anymore. They were thinking, remembering, choosing. And then, she moved, slowly. She stood, the blanket slipping from her shoulders, her feet touching the floor like she didn't trust it to hold her. She walked to the center of the room, just a few steps, but it was the first time she had come without the heater, without the water. She stood there, looking at me. Not past me. At me. And then she spoke. One word. Cracked. Rough. Barely a breath. But real. LRA. I didn't understand it at first. It came so softly I thought it was the heater, or the storm, or just a thought echoing in my head. But she said it again, clearer this time. LRA. Her voice didn't tremble. It ached, like it had been locked away for years, and now, finally, the key had turned. I set the tool down slowly, afraid the noise might break the moment. I looked at her, careful, steady. LRA, I repeated. She nodded, just once, and it was the most powerful thing I'd ever seen. I didn't ask what it meant, didn't ask if it was her real name or just something she had chosen, because that wasn't the point. The point was, it was hers. A name is a strange kind of magic. It holds more than sound, it holds identity, memory, power. And when you say it out loud, you're not just claiming space, you're claiming yourself. She had chosen to exist. To be known. And I would remember that forever. She stepped back then, her hands shaking just slightly. I reached for a cup of water and held it out, no words, no explanation, just an offering. She took it. Her fingers brushed mine. And for the first time, she didn't pull away. She drank slowly, carefully, like every drop reminded her she was still here, still alive, still LRA. The storm outside rattled the door, but it didn't matter. Inside, something much quieter was happening. And somehow, it felt louder than thunder. I sat back down on the bench. She returned to her spot by the wall, but this time she didn't curl up. She sat straight, eyes open, watching, not with fear, but with presence, with purpose. I whispered her name one more time, not to question it, but to honor it. LRA. She didn't answer. But she closed her eyes. And smiled. Just barely. But enough. Enough to break something inside me. Because in that moment, I wasn't alone anymore. Neither was she. Chapter 7, The Engineer Returns. Something changed after she spoke her name, like a wall had cracked, not completely, but just enough for light to slip through. LRA didn't suddenly become talkative, didn't start telling stories, laughing, or asking questions, but something about the way she moved shifted. She stood straighter, walked with a kind of quiet weight in her steps, as if every motion no longer needed permission. And her eyes, they no longer just observed, they studied, measured, calculated. One morning, I found her staring at the broken drone on my workbench. It was an old Scout unit, half its limbs missing, wires torn like veins, the processor long since fried. I'd tried to fix it weeks ago, failed, and left it to gather dust, but she didn't look at it like junk. She looked at it like it meant something. She stepped closer, hesitated, then reached out, her fingers hovering above the metal casing, not touching, not yet, but remembering. I said nothing, just watched. Then, slowly, she knelt beside the bench. Her hands moved gently, tracing the surface of the drone until she found a hidden latch tucked beneath a dented plate. She pressed it, and it clicked open. My breath caught, I hadn't even known that was there. She began disassembling it, one piece at a time, with no rush, no panic. Her fingers moved with practiced precision, like they'd done this before, maybe even 1,000 times. She didn't fumble or guess. She remembered. I stepped closer and placed a toolkit beside her. She didn't look at me, but her hand reached out and picked the right tool, a curved micro-welder, old model, still functional. She used it like it was part of her, like muscle memory, like home. I sat beside her. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. Because in that moment, LRA wasn't a refugee, wasn't a stranger, wasn't someone lost in mud and silence. She was an engineer. She was herself. The longer she worked, the more alive she looked. Her brow furrowed with focus, her lips pressed together in that particular kind of frustration, the kind that says, I can fix this, even when everything looks broken. And her hands, oh, her hands, they moved like they knew the language of machines better than words ever could. When she finished adjusting the power grid, she looked up at me, not for approval, just to see if I was still there. I was. I always had been. You used to do this, I said softly, not a question, a truth. She didn't reply, but her gaze didn't drop, and that was enough. We turned the drone on together. The lights blinked, once, then twice, and the unit buzzed to life. Its sensor eye glowed a faint green. Its limbs twitched. She didn't smile, but her eyes widened, just a little, a flicker of something ancient and beautiful, wonder. Not surprise, not pride, but something deeper. Recognition. I whispered, you didn't forget. She lowered her head for a moment, then nodded. Barely. But it was enough. That night, she sat beside the workbench again, not on the floor, not by the door, but beside me, close enough that our shoulders nearly touched. She picked up a rusted sensor and began examining the circuit paths, and I handed her the soldering pen without a word. She didn't thank me, but her fingers wrapped around it like it belonged there, like she belonged there. I don't know who she was before they left her in Sector 8. I don't know who trained her, what stations she worked on, or how many lives she helped save. But I know one thing, they tried to erase her, and they failed. Because you can't destroy what's part of you. You can only bury it. And one day, given time, and warmth, and silence, it begins to rise again. Chapter 8, The Touch. The light in the outpost had changed. Not brighter. Not warmer. Just, softer. As if the room had finally exhaled after holding its breath for too long. LRA and I worked in silence, not the old kind of silence, heavy and tense, the kind that filled space between strangers, but something different. This silence asked for nothing. It simply was. A shared pause, a breath between words that hadn't yet arrived. She sat across from me at the workbench, her hands steady, her eyes focused. She was fully here now, no longer curled in corners, no longer watching shadows pass. The drone she had brought back to life buzzed faintly at her feet. Still twitchy, still crooked, but alive, just like her. I handed her a small component, a coil burned at one end. She took it without looking. Her fingers brushed mine. Just for a second. But something in that second shifted the ground between us. It wasn't accidental. It wasn't about survival. It was intentional. A touch born not from fear, but from choice. My breath caught, but I stayed still. So did she. Her hand lingered, light as dust, soft as a thought. Then, it slipped away. She said nothing. Offered no explanation. She simply continued working, as though she hadn't just broken the final wall between us. But I knew. She had reached for me. Not the other way around. Not because she needed help. Not because she was falling. But because, for the first time since we met, she wanted to. And that changed everything. The outpost didn't look any different, still rusted, still patched with salvage, but it felt warmer somehow. More alive. More ours. That night, after a quiet dinner of ready-dried rice and half-warm broth, she didn't drift off to the heater, the corner, or the cot. She stayed. Near me. Not touching, just close. And when I stood to clean up, she reached again, not for food, not for tools, but for me. Her fingers curled lightly around the sleeve of my shirt. No pressure. No urgency. Just presence. I turned to face her slowly. She looked up at me, silver eyes calm, unreadable, glowing faintly in the dim light. And I saw her. Not the scars. Not the silence. Not the green skin or the haunted gaze. Her. The person beneath all of it. I'm not going anywhere, I said softly. She didn't reply, but she didn't let go either. She just stood there, one hand on my sleeve, her breath slow and quiet and real. And I understood something I hadn't before. This wasn't just about healing. It was about reclaiming. For her, touch had never meant safety. It had meant pain. Control. Invasion. But now, standing with her fingers gently resting on my arm, she was rewriting that meaning. She was choosing what it meant now. She was defining it. A moment later, she let go. Not abruptly. Just naturally, like the moment had passed, but its weight remained. I didn't say anything else. Words would have been too loud. Too clumsy. So I just smiled. And for the first time, so did she. Not a full smile. Just a soft curve at the edge of her lips. But it was enough. Enough to know the wall wasn't just cracking anymore. It was falling, brick by brick. And she was the one tearing it down. Chapter 9, The Storm Inside. The wind came first, soft, distant, like a sigh traveling through empty corridors. Then the pressure shifted, a heaviness in the air that made even the walls seem to hold their breath, the kind of silence that feels wrong. Outside the outpost, the sky boiled in shades of gray and bruised violet. Dust curled along the horizon. Static laced the air like invisible threads. You didn't need sensors to know what was coming. A storm. Not the kind that breaks glass or floods streets. The other kind. The kind that drags up memories. The kind that makes ghosts walk again. Inside, LRA sat by the window. She didn't say anything. But I could tell, she felt it too. Her back was straight. Her shoulders tense. Her hands, once steady with tools, now rested on her lap like coiled wire. I watched her, not out of worry, but out of instinct. When the wind howled louder, she didn't flinch, not like before, not the way she had when she first arrived. But something in her shifted. Her gaze stayed locked on the clouds. Her breath slowed. Her eyes darkened, not with fear, with memory. There are storms that happen outside, and there are storms that happen inside us. Sometimes, they arrive at the same time. LRA, I said softly. She didn't answer. But her fingers tightened, just slightly. I can lock the doors. Pull the shutters. We'll be safe in here. She blinked, then nodded once. But her eyes said something else. We are not alone. And I understood. This wasn't just about rain or wind. This was about what storms bring with them. Later, when the sky cracked open and rain slammed against the roof like fists, we sat near the heater, shoulders nearly touching. She was quiet. Still. But her body was coiled. Ready. Like she was waiting for something to break. or return. I handed her a cup of water. She held it like it might vanish. Her eyes didn't meet mine. They stayed fixed on the door. That's when I asked the question I had held back for too long. Who hurt you, Lara? Her breath caught. She didn't move. Didn't blink. But her entire presence changed. The air around her grew heavier, like grief had taken form and settled across her shoulders. Her mouth opened. But no sound came out. She closed her eyes. And in the silence, she reached up, not to me, but to the scar on her collarbone, the one shaped like a spiral, burned too deep to ever fully fade. Her fingers touched it lightly. Then dropped. I didn't need an answer. Because that was the answer. Whoever had done this, they hadn't just hurt her body. They had tried to erase her. Rewrite her. Control her. And yet, she was here. Breathing. Thinking. Rebuilding. Whoever they are, I said, they don't get to define you. Her eyes opened, silver in the storm light. She looked at me, really looked at me. And for the first time, I saw it. Not the girl in the mud. Not the silent figure in the corner. I saw her. The survivor. The engineer. The woman who chose to speak her name. Who chose to reach out. Who chose to stay. You're safe here, I whispered. As safe as I can make it. And she nodded. Not because she believed it fully. But because she wanted to. And that meant everything. The storm outside raged for hours. The roof groaned. The windows shook. The power flickered. But inside, we held still. Side by side. Breathing. Waiting. Becoming something more. Chapter 10, I Want to Stay. The storm had passed. The wind no longer screamed. The sky, once torn open, now hung quiet above Sector 8, pale and bruised like a wound beginning to close. The outpost creaked in its bones, but it still stood. We still stood. Morning came slow. Gray light drifted through the cracks in the shutters. Dust floated in beams of sunlight like old memories with nowhere left to hide. I was pouring hot water into 2 chipped metal cups when I heard her move. Not a noise, exactly, just the whisper of bare feet against the floor. I turned. She was there, wrapped in a clean shirt, hair still damp from the rinse she'd taken just before dawn. Her posture was relaxed, but there was something different in the way she moved now. She didn't look at the door anymore. She looked at me. And then, just like that, she spoke. I want to stay. The words were soft, but they landed in the room like thunder. I froze, cup still in my hand, steam curling around my fingers. Lara stood across from me, her voice low, her eyes steady. I want to stay, she repeated, not because I have nowhere else to go, not because I'm afraid, but because I choose this. She didn't mean the outpost, not just the shelter, the food, the heater, or the quiet. She meant us, this space between us, filled with silence and kindness and slow, careful repair. I set the cup down gently, walked over to her, slow. No rush. No pressure. Just presence. You don't have to ask, I said, almost whispering. Her lips curved, a smile, small but real. I'm not asking, she replied, I just wanted you to know. That did something to me. It reached a place inside that I thought had rusted shut. For so long, I'd been alone here. The quiet had become my armor. The silence, my language. But now she was choosing to share that silence with me. She stepped closer, barefoot, deliberate. When she reached me, she lifted a hand, slowly, and placed it against my chest. I felt it, the warmth of her skin, the quiet steadiness of her breath, the way her fingers curled ever so slightly into the fabric of my shirt, not to hold, not to pull, but to feel, to be. My heart was loud in my chest. And she felt it. We stood there, in the center of that small, broken room, surrounded by rusted panels and flickering lights, and for the first time, there was no fear, no doubt. Just quiet. And trust. And breath. I reached up, covering her hand with mine. I want you to stay too, I said, not because I needed her, but because she had become part of this place, part of me. She leaned her forehead gently against mine. Our eyes closed, not to escape, but to exist. Together. Not survivors anymore. Not broken pieces. Just two people who had chosen to rebuild, not with tools, but with time. That night, the heater hummed. The old drone clicked softly in the corner, its light blinking like a sleepy heartbeat. Lara curled beside me on the cot, not at the edge, not facing the wall, but close. Her hand rested on mine. No tension. No hesitation. Just stillness. Warmth. Belonging. And as I drifted into sleep, I realized something. Peace isn't something you stumble into. It's not something you're given. It's something you build. And this moment, this breath, this hand in mine, this was the beginning. She never asked to be saved, and he never planned to stay, but in the ashes of a forgotten war, among rusted walls and broken machines, they found something neither of them thought they'd ever have again: peace, trust, home. But peace in a place like this never lasts, not when the past still hunts you. She remembered her name. Now, others will too. If you felt something, even a flicker, tell me in the comments, because stories like this only stay alive when we remember them together. And this one, it's only just beginning.